Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner at the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we highlight a group of volunteers connecting families with the past by finding and photographing graves. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. To share more with us about this group and their mission, I'm joined again by reporter Terry Caddo. Terry, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Wyatt. I'm glad to be here.
Before we get into what this group exactly is, how did you find them in the first place?
So, basically, I had a different story that I was working on. It was a vault story that recently came out about a plane crash that happened in Hermantown in 1954. And I was looking up the people who were lost in that plane crash and trying to see if I could find their graves. And I stumbled upon this website called Find a Grave. And I was like, this is fascinating. I've not come across this before. Okay. I kept looking at it and digging through it. And I kept noticing that a lot of the people who died and were buried in the Northland were submitted by kind of the same names. You could see photos submitted by Waterdogger65, or you'd see Rita Kate as one of the photographers, and you'd be like, okay. And you could look under their profile and you could see all the different cemeteries that they've covered, and they're all Northland ones. I'm like, okay, these are local people, or at least they're people who have taken a lot of photographs and done a lot of documenting of local graves. So I kind of wondered what would make a person start doing this, especially for people that they didn't necessarily know. Because as far as I could tell, I didn't think they were necessarily relatives. So I started reaching out to people, and to my surprise, they started getting back to me. That was really fun.
So what exactly is the Find a Grave group? Who are these people?
So they're not an official group. These are just people that I came across on the website that I just started reaching out to. A lot of them have never met each other. Some of them have talked to each other through messaging on the website, but basically they're all volunteers who go out, and either they're going out with the sole purpose of taking photos of grave sites for people who have requested photos, or they go out and they're documenting a specific cemetery in the region. They pick a cemetery that's local to them, and they go out and they work on doing every grave that they can find in that cemetery.
Wow. How many people are contributing to this?
So, I mean, there's millions of people who submit to the Find a Grave website, but locally I talked to about a good handful, about 6 people who were willing to share with me a little bit about what they do and why they do it. And they had some very fascinating stories to tell. So one such volunteer is Rita Shripa, and she's up in Ganesan Township, and she goes out to Calvary Cemetery up there, and she gets requests from the website. So people who are looking for their family members saying, hey, I think I have a family member buried at this site, but I've never seen their grave before. Will you go out and take a photo of it for me? It's to help a lot with genealogical searches. It's connected to Ancestry.com as well. So she'll get a request saying, hey, can you go find this person? And she'll go out to the site and she'll take a look and see what she can find. She will get a map of the cemetery, and she will go through and find, especially some graves that either the marker has disappeared over the years or there was never a marker for them in the first place. She can still find a grave site for them at least.
I saw that. One of the things on there you could do was volunteer pictures for people. And to me, that was a wonderful way to give back because I'd gotten so much in my genealogy being able to go there. And so what happens is people who generally are not in an area will ask for a picture to go on their loved one's memorial. That's on Find a Grave. If they're not able to be there, they'll ask for a volunteer photographer. And so I just started doing that because, like I said, it was a way to give back for all the things I got from being on the site and good stuff for my genealogy and finding my own family.
Gotcha. So talk to me more about Rita and how she got involved in contributing to this website.
She started, like a lot of folks who started looking into their own family genealogy, and she started kind of digging around, and she found the grave sites of relatives, and she found so much information through other people's contributions to the site that she wanted to then give back and contribute on her own in turn. And she doesn't do it as much as she used to. She kind of, not as often as she admittedly would like to do, but when she, in her heyday of it, she would have a full kit that she would use to clean up the gravestones whenever she would go out and do it. And admittedly, she talks a little bit about how her husband would call her Morticia because her habit was a little bit macabre, a little bit solemn, but he came around eventually. He started liking it as well.
For me, because for some people this is the only picture they will ever have of their loved one's grave, I liked to actually clean up around the stone. And so actually for my birthday one year, my husband got me it's like a sidewalk edger. It's just this little half circle. on the end of a pole, so I could put it down right next to the stone all the way around and clear away all the grass, all the weeds, anything growing over it. I had my little toolkit because I'd have like the scrub brush, a bottle of water. I actually got like the dental picks from my dentist's office, the little metal ones.
Yeah.
So I could clean out like the lettering if it was packed in with weeds or dirt. Because to me, if you want a picture, you want to actually see the picture, not just a mat of grass with one little circle peeking through, because some of the older graves in particular, they get buried and covered over time. So to me, that was really, really important.
Fascinating. So tell me about the other people you spoke with.
So another individual would be Tom Edwards, and he is kind of different in that his approach isn't necessarily to have one cemetery that he works on. He and his wife actually go and make stops whenever they're traveling someplace new. They'll find a cemetery nearby, and they'll go and they'll see what gaps they can fill while they're, or what requests are there through the website. And it's just kind of a thing that they do when they're traveling already, when they're already having a day out. They go out and they hit up a cemetery.
Sometimes we go searching for our family, and very specifically looking for a family member, and that's one purpose. Sometimes we use it as I don't know what the right word is, a thing to do. It's our fun getaway, and we'll pick a city or an area where there's some cemeteries that are under photographed, and we'll just go out for the day. And hey, we're going to go for a drive, or if we want to trip somewhere, we'll stop somewhere along the way, and it's a place we've never been, or it's a military cemetery that we've never been to. So sometimes we'll do it just as an excursion.
Sure.
Hey, we're going to go out and we're going to go, see something and learn something. That's certainly one. I'd say we also have our cemeteries that we kind of not quite own, but we take care of, or are a little bit more dear to us or local to us, and so we try to keep them accurate and updated. We kind of the hometown or home team cemeteries.
Interesting. So it sounds like they kind of have a nice little routine in place with the two of them. A little bit of a morbid routine, but it's cute in a way that they get to do that together.
I mean, I think a big thing that I hear from a lot of these volunteers is that it may seem morbid at first, but once you start hanging out in cemeteries, it doesn't feel like it anymore. You get more of a peaceful feeling. You're kind of out there and it's quiet and it's not a lot going on. And it's not like the representation of cemeteries in movies. Because whenever you see whenever you see a cemetery on screen, something bad is going to be happening, right? In real life, not the case. Most of the time you're out there, you're by yourself, and it's pretty quiet.
And I imagine they're not out there at nighttime. I imagine they're there in the day when there's good lighting and there's a little bit of safety in terms of the light versus, a dark, scary cemetery at night.
They're not doing night shots of these graves. They're definitely doing daytime visits. And in fact, they're trying to make sure that they get the best picture that they could get. For example, Tom talks a little bit about how he goes out with a drone and he tries to get above shots of the graves. So that way you can kind of see it in relation to the other graves in the cemetery. And that's kind of a nice different approach to it.
I can always appreciate a good aerial shot as a drone photographer myself, so I can see how that would be very helpful to have that aerial view as well, especially if you're getting kind of turned around or lost a little bit.
Well, and that's another thing is also volunteers go out with their phones and they record the GPS location of the graves that they find. So that way then when you go to find your great aunt's grave, you can go straight to the spot rather than trying to do all of your own searching.
So with this kind of work, I imagine it comes with some challenges at times. I'm sure it's called Find a Grave, so they have to look for these graves. So I imagine there are some trickier ones than others.
Especially if they are unmarked. That can be a real challenge. You have to contact people who work for the cemeteries and get maps and try and go out and find them in relation to other names and markers that might still be there and might not still be there. Because land changes over time, and who knows when this person was buried. It could have been 5 years ago. It could have been 50 years ago. And it could be sometimes hard to find. And Rita talks a little bit about how one of her most rewarding ones was this woman who knew that her grandmother was buried in this cemetery. She knew she had been there when she was a child, but whenever she looked, Rita couldn't seem to find it until finally she did.
And I was looking, and there was nothing listed for her. And it was just like, oh my gosh, and she was like, no, I know she was at Calvary because I was there. Well, she was able to send me a photograph of where the grave was, and it happened to be in an area of Calvary that had like the boxwood edging around. There's just this one little section that, for whatever reason, has this nice little boxwood hedge around it. And because she had that picture, and she said, no, I was there, I know it's Calvary.
Okay.
I was able to go look around the boxwoods in that whole section, and I found her grandmother's grave.
Aw.
And it was there. It had a nice big stone and everything. It's just for some reason, you know how things slip through the cracks?
Sure.
It hadn't been properly documented. And so that was just so huge to her.
Yeah.
So huge, because even though she knew her grandma was buried there, to say, I can't find her and they don't have a record, leaves you like, oh my gosh, they lost my grandma.
Well, it sounds like a difficult treasure hunt in a weird kind of sense. That like you're scouring the area to find these unmarked graves, and that definitely sounds like an interesting challenge.
And in the end, the treasure is your family member. Or somebody else's family member, as the case may be. It's not friendship, but it's family.
In a morbid kind of way, but yes. So last week, you actually got to, with another volunteer for the site, you got to go along with a search for these graves. So talk to me about how that was.
Yeah, so we got to take along with Lori Kelly, and she was out looking for a couple of different people at this old Calvary cemetery out in Cloquet. And she had a couple of names, and the name that we were looking for, the last name was Nagorski, and we kept looking and walked through the section. We knew we were in the right section. It was section G of the cemetery. We kept looking at each gravestone as you go over it, and then it just so happened that Clint had walked right past it, and I was like, oh, Nagorski, that's the name. And he said, oh, I thought it was Mugorski. I'm like, no, it's an N, not an M. So we found it. We did find it right, not after about 15, 20 minutes of searching. Not serious searching, because we were also stopping to take photos and everything too. But yeah, we found the name. It was unfortunately, sadly, a baby that only lived to be about 1 year old.
Oh no.
But it kind of helped somebody, I'm assuming, help somebody figure out like who else they're related to, or they'd never heard of that person before. And I don't know.
Do you know how old the gravestone was?
1950s, I want to say, but I'm not 100% sure. There'll be photos of it in the paper, but yeah.
So is it kind of like the searching like genealogical history kind of a thing, or? Yeah,
well, and there were a couple of other relatives of theirs right next to them as well, and so they were double checking the dates and the names on those as well.
Gotcha. What was that experience like for you? Because obviously it sounded like it was fun in a sense of that, like you're trying to find this grave, but also, it is kind of morbid it is a graveyard and you're finding a grave. But
it's kind of admittedly kind of a fun morbidity, because it was... Mm-hmm. It was neat to meet Lori and hear more about how she does this. She carries her knee pads with her so she can go down on her knees and clear off the gravestone. And she has this beautiful black cat because she lives literally across the street from this cemetery. So her cat follows along with her as she's walking through the cemetery. So she's walking around, big black cat following her. All the things point to being kind of spooky, but it was not. It was like a pretty nice day with a peaceful cemetery and just walking around and trying to find a Nagorski.
So after talking with all these different contributors to the Find a Grave and going out on a search yourself, what would you say now is your takeaway from this experience, and how would you relate that back to the theme of Northlandia?
Well, what makes it part of Northlandia is that it's a very unique hobby. It's not something that everyone does. It's not something that you would commonly think about as a thing to do, but it is an invaluable hobby. It is something that preserves history and helps people make connections to family members and people who are lost, or maybe they'd never heard of. They'd never heard of this relative of theirs until they see a gravestone of them on the website. And it's truly a fascinating bit of the world that you wouldn't think about. And like I said, not for everyone. Honestly, I'm a little bit tempted to grab my phone and go out and check out a cemetery maybe once in a while now. And I'm definitely grateful for them. It's a good way to connect to history and family.
All right, well, I think we'll wrap up there, Terry. Thanks again for joining us and sharing the story with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening, and I hope you get a chance to look up your own family members on Find a Grave now.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos by Clint Austin, visit duluthnewstribune.com/Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnew's.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.